Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us with another episode. Before we dive into the intro, just want to remind you, our friend Michael David Wilson over at This Is Horror Podcast, he has a editing and writing consultation service. He has worked with authors such as Josh Mallerman and David Moody. For more information on that, go to michaeldavidwilson.co.uk/editing. And welcome to Dead Headspace. This is episode 114, and I am your host, Patrick R. McDonough. We are not joined today by my co-host, Brian LaFaro. He will be back for the next episode with Heather Levy. This is a part of Silver Shamrock's Horrorcast, a podcast network that includes Killing Time with Silver Shamrock and On Burying the Dead, where we exhume classic horror paperbacks for the new generation. Today, I'm talking to the author of quite a few great books, but the one we're going to probably focus on today is The Last House on Needless Street. That comes out soon after this recording. Please welcome Catriona Ward again. I'm sorry if I messed it up. I'm just going to refer to you as Kat from now on. So say hi, Kat.
Perfectly. Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a real honor, real pleasure. There's so much buzz around this book, but we'll dive into that soon. And this is a spoiler-free episode, spoiler-free show, so just have to put that out there ahead of time for listeners. Let's start with the baseline question. What got you into horror?
Well, I mean, I think that horror is often the refuge of the lonely, and the lonely teenager in particular. So I had quite an itinerant childhood. So I grew up in Kenya, Madagascar, Yemen, Morocco, and but it was pre-internet days as well. You can't really take your life from one place to another. So you can't really take friends. What you can take is books. And I found particularly the novels of Stephen King incredibly kind of comforting in a way. I suppose comforting might sound like a strange word to apply to horror, but I don't think it is. Mm-mm. I think that knowing that someone else is afraid is incredibly reassuring, And then probably the thing that really started my really intense interest in it was we moved around a lot, but we went back every year to this one place on Dartmoor, which, if you don't know what Dartmoor's like, it looks very like Scotland. It's very wild, very bleak. It has wild ponies wandering all over these moors. And we stayed every summer in this house, which had been, I think, it was 800 years old, very spooky. And from the age of about 13, I would wake up every night with a hand in the small of my back, pushing me very firmly out of bed, and I'd fall on the floor, and I could feel every finger in this hand individually on my back. And I think I slept on the floor in my sister's room for about two summers steadily. And it's so weird, isn't it, that sort of thing, because you don't tell an adult, do you? Because everything's so weird when you're a teenager anyway. It doesn't seem any more or less weird than anything else. And it was probably the most frightened I've ever been in my life. It's a kind of fear that doesn't really have any relationship to the daylight world. Like, you don't feel it in the light. And when I first read my first kind of gothic story, which was The Monkey's Paw by W.W. Jacobs, I felt that fear again, and I thought, well, this is where you put it. This is where you put that feeling. This is the architecture that can cage that fear. It was like a revelation, really. And I'd hasten to add that when I was in my 20s, with the invention of Google, which was very helpful, I discovered what this thing was, because I still do get them occasionally. It's a hypnagogic hallucination, which is just on the cusp of sleep. You hallucinate very strongly, not just visually, but also with sound and with touch. But I don't think it matters really what it was. I think what really the thing I carry away from it is that intense cold fear. It's like a hand reaching inside of you. It's absolutely terrifying. So for me, that was sort of where I started out. And when I first started writing, that's what immediately just naturally came out, for better or worse.
Man, that a hand, how you can feel. See, just you're talking and you're not even having an editor fine tune these words. I'm just like, that's one thing I took away from. That was my introduction to you, was The Last House on Needless Street. But you as a writer, myself a reader, I appreciate when you string these certain words together, and it kind of focuses on these fine details that you can say, oh, a hand touched my back, and that's creepy. But the way you add to it, how you could feel each individual finger, now that puts it up another notch. And that's making, as I say, it's making my, if I was doing this at night, my brain would be tingling right now. That's so amazing. And
isn't that what it's about, though? All of, sharing your fear, writing horror is about saying, I'm afraid of this.
Yeah.
Are you afraid of this too? It's a sort of great act of empathy, isn't it? I think that you put your finger on that there, I think. Not a ghostly finger, a real finger.
The thing is that I agree. It's books are, stories are a way for me to say, this is my this is how I walk through life with this experience. Now you can understand me a little bit better. And you I'm piggybacking off of you. Fear is innate to all of us. I mean, think back way when the species started. I mean, I'm sure we were in like caves around fires because darkness is scary, and we're still. I think it's fair to say that in some degree, all of us are afraid of the dark, and you covered fear really well in a really interesting way with Needless Street. I would like to step back from that and go to the earlier days of your writing, when you set out for, okay, I want to be a writer. I want this to be my life. Did you have one focus on this is what scares me, or did you kind of just let it all go on the page?
I think what was interesting is that, having not thought about that experience with the hand and the small of my back for many years, what immediately leapt out onto the page was a version of that. As people may or may not know, my first novel, Raw Blood, is a ghost story, or The Girl from Raw Blood is in the States, and I was surprised by anyone, and it just goes to show how writing happens almost off stage, like backstage in your mind a lot of the time. What comes out at the end, you're often quite unconscious of the processes that have been going on. But I do feel like it's such a universal leveler fear, isn't it? I mean, not all, you think about romance as a genre, that's great, but not everyone falls in love. Not everyone would experience love in their lifetime. Everyone will be afraid. It's something that it's one of those three certainties.
From the day you're born, you come out. What the hell is happening? What's life?
And it's how we learn, isn't it? It's how we learn and survive. So, although it gets quite a bad rap, it's incredibly useful and critical to keeping us all on this planet.
You know what? I don't know why this made me think of it, but Chuck E. Cheese. I'm only asking because, okay, I don't know if that's super well known outside the States. I know you were born in the States, but okay, so my wife and I go there. My son's almost 2, and we're like, well, he's old enough now, and he's having a great time. He loves playing chase, so he loves mom and dad going after him. And I'm just like goofing around, following him, and he's running towards this one door, and the door opens up, and it's one of the workers in a Chuck E. Cheese costume. And his face, my audio listeners won't be able to see this, but mimicking my son, he goes to, and I don't know what this says about me as a person, but I knew he was okay. So I thought it was kind of funny and interesting at the same time, because I think I would react like that. And that fear of the unknown, it's funny to me because we know what that is. That's a person. But to him, that's the very first time he saw that in person, and he was terrified.
God.
I'm not sure how you follow up that, so I'm going to move on to.
It made me think. It made me think about how. I was thinking about your reaction, really, which was that you found it funny. Because
I'm probably fucked up for that.
You make a choice quite quickly, don't you, between utter terror and laughter? They're somehow quite close together. It's a strange one, isn't it?
They kind of hold hands. They're like those sisters in The Shining. One's horror, one's comedy.
Oh, now that's a terrifying film.
And you know what? I really think you need both of those, at least a little bit. And you, um, this doesn't spoil anything. I thought it was funny at first, and then I understood why Olivia the cat in your story kept referring to as every human or male human as Ted.
Yeah.
For me, my experience was this is hilarious, but then
Yeah.
as it went on, I'm like, this is kind of sad too at the same time.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed that, and you kind of need that break if it's 200-300 pages of like utter sadness.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I needed her as well. Like, it's funny, isn't it? Because she came to perform the same function for me when I was writing it as she does for Ted.
Really?
Which is a little bit of comfort. You know, I'd look forward to writing those sections because it's quite a dark place to spend your time, that world. And so I think it sort of became a bit metafiction, really. So she came to comfort me in the same way she comforted Ted, and now I think she also performs the same function for the reader as well. And it's so interesting what you say about it being sad as well, because I think that was where I sort of started thinking about this book. And as you know, it grows far beyond this. But I started thinking about it in terms of serial killers and their pets, which I'm completely fascinated by, because obviously the pet, the animal, is forced into this relationship of dependence and love with someone who is dangerous and devoid of emotional affect, and somehow someone who, and the paradox is there as well on the side of the owner or the human animal who's the forms the other part of the relationship, who's a killer, because they so often start out with hurting animals, and yet they're able to form, incredibly needy relationships with pets. Like Dennis Nielsen is the one I first thought of, because he had I don't know if people are familiar with him over in the US, but he preyed on vulnerable young men in the late 70s and early 80s, and killed them, ate them sometimes, and buried a lot of them in his back garden. But he used to keep them around the house for quite some time, and he had this dog called Bleep. And he was incredibly fond of Bleep. He loved that dog. When he was arrested, the only thing he really cared about was what had happened to Bleep, who I fear, obviously, understandably, I'm afraid to report, did not meet a good end, because no one was willing to take on a dog that had lived with a cannibal. But I thought about Bleep, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have a sort of almost like a naive narrator, and I always love this in books because you so rarely get it, where the audience knows more than the main character, and you watch the cat gradually come to understand what the person she lives with is and does. But I realised it was too small a story. That I thought that canvas isn't large enough. We don't get to tell all the wider story of like trauma and suffering if we just stick to the cat's perspective. So I broadened it out, and as you know, it exploded into a many-tentacled monster of a narrative that takes in all sorts of things. But that was where it started, because it's a very strong fascination of mine.
So before I finish this book, this is so weird how fun. It's really funny how life is. My wife and I were like, well, we finished some of our shows, and on Netflix is what we mainly watch, and we're scrolling through, and she says, this is the funniest thing, Brennan and my wife don't like horror and audio, folks. I'm doing air quotes, and I'm like, but they both really are very intrigued and fascinated by serial killers, which that's a subgenre of horror or crime, or they all blend together. And we're looking through and we're seeing what's new on Netflix, and we see Memories of a Murderer, the Nilsson tapes, and that came out this week. And
yeah, I've watched it. Oh my God! Yeah, he's it's chilling, isn't it? I mean, if you wrote it, if someone had scripted that, you'd say it was overkill.
Yeah.
And that bit where he's eating, putting hot sauce on his curry in prison, and you can hear him eating.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't get away with that. Your editor would put a red pen through that. But it's real, and that's so interesting, isn't it? Because I know exactly what you mean about this juxtaposition or this opposition between like true crime and horror. I'm sort of the same. I'm so easily frightened by anything fictional that I find it difficult to watch horror, which I think is actually the case with a lot of horror writers. I think that's part of what makes you a good writer is you're afraid of everything. But I'm completely insatiable when it comes to true crime. And so I was talking to a psychologist friend of mine about this, and she said, it's a common appetite. I'm far from alone. And she said, well, I said, well, why is this? And she said, well, when you meet an anomaly, something that deviates from the social order or from your normal behavioral patterns, you can do one of three things. You can fight it, you can run away from it, or you can make friends with it. Those are the three kind of adaptive responses. And in a way, it's a sort of, and I think particularly perhaps for women, I don't know, there's a sort of sense of arming yourself. There's a sort of sense of inoculating yourself against horror in terms of the feelings that you might be forced to experience one day, but also a sense of taking in everything you can in order to be perfectly equipped for this, hypothetical situation. And I'd never thought about it like that before. It is a sort of evolutionary response, and I found that completely gripping. So, and I suppose the extreme to which people take that would be, women who marry, the serial killers in prison. There's no better way of making friends with someone than marrying them, I guess. I mean, arguable, but
right. Wow, there's so many fun things that. You said horror is comfortable for you. It's fun talking about this too for me. So, look, the listeners that listen to this show, they're horror fans, they're crime fans, dark fiction fans. So I'm sure a lot of them can relate to what we're saying. But I'm gonna focus on one thing earlier about first off how Dennis Nelson narrated it's his actual tapes, which reminded me of a serial killer I was introduced to a few years ago, Edmund Kemper.
Oh wow, yeah.
Because he's also a narrator, but of fictional books. I just
I've heard a bit of this. Yeah,
the two things about them that I thought was identical was the cops didn't know if they would get any information out of them, and then both cops that have talked to both of them. They have said they overshared. They said everything. And that's what Nilsson kind of seemed to pride himself on, was that he is the most forthright serial killer in Britain ever. And
yeah, well, that's his self-constructed narrative, isn't it? Like, I'm always a bit suspicious of that.
Yeah. But the creepiest thing for me was in the beginning when they describe how there's a manhole in Nilsson's apartment complex, and they said that I think it was an engineer found bones, but they said also they found pieces of flesh. And to think of it as like I work in the wastewater department in my county, and to think that like I've seen nasty shit down there. Like I have to clear not going to too much details, but I clear what's called fatbergs or big grease balls from cooking oil and rags is just a term to cover.
You really know about horror.
Yeah, to say rags is just like actual plastic bags or actual rags, but if I saw that, I think I would have to take a few days off. I mean to think you see, like, we see each other's flesh every day, but to see it disassociate from the body, that makes my mind broken.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's something about transforming a living. I mean, the transition from living to dead is momentous enough as it is. Like the difference between not dead and dead is just so incredibly massive anyway, that the conception of that person becoming not only stopping living, but becoming a sort of object to be treated like waste, to be treated like in the casual way we treat sort of, I don't know, food or waste or things like that is everything that we have been taught revolts against it in the most literal sense of the word.
Yeah, and going back to one more point you made, where you said you think it might be more related to women, where they feel a certain way with protecting yourself. I think that's very accurate because in this world, it's sad to say, but men are usually the offenders because they're typically physically more imitating, not imitating. I'm struggling to find words. Like Ted, tenses and words are hard, but they're more. they're scarier at times, and that's sad.
I think that's. I mean, it's all sorts of things, isn't it? It's cultural as well. We kind of there's. There's that myth of the fascinating, devious, clever serial killer, which is complete garbage, obviously, because serial killers are mostly opportunists, and the reason most people die is because they won't be missed, and the vulnerable are the first to die, and that usually seems to, at least historically, counted for women, children, and gay men. And in the sense that I know what you mean about this, and there's this, the Lake Sammamish murders have a particular effect on me, for instance, where I just, for those who don't know, very briefly, Ted Bundy, I think it was 1978 on the.
That's about right.
I think so, and very late in the summer. At Lake Sammamish, where it was a weekend, I think it was Memorial Day weekend, even possibly, and there was thousands and thousands of people, families, friends, people with coolers, music blasting, and Ted Bundy spent the day there. He had his arm in a cast, went up to various women, introduced himself by name, separated them out from their friends and or family, and first of all, I think it was Denise Nasland, and second, Janice Ott, and took two women in one day from the middle of a crowded, sunlit shore, and killed them. And they were found a couple of months later on a hillside. And this idea that you can walk up to someone, a man can walk up to a woman and take her away in broad daylight, with no pretenses, and kill her is kind of terrifying to me. I want the detail that always gets me is that cast, right? So he got them away from their group by asking them to help him. So they died because they were kind. And this to me seems such an egregious, cruel blow. It
really is. It makes you think. It's like you don't know who you're walking by most of the days. You don't pay attention. It's crazy. Is that why you named him Ted, your protagonist?
Yes, because I'm so afraid of that event. Yes, it is. I want to emphasize that this book is not based on Ted Bundy at all.
Right.
But there is a sort of echoes of my fear of that event that run through the book. There is, for instance, a lake, and there's a bit in actually the book by, I think it's, I want to say Robert Keppel. Is that right? When he was talking about the recovery of at the crime scene, I don't know how strong a stomach your listeners have, but there was some, they had to do a recovery at that scene with Janice Ott and Denise Nasland's remains which were unprecedented. They'd never had to treat a scene like that before. So, for instance, they had to gather, and there was also one other unidentified girl who may have been Georgianne Hawkins, they don't know. But they had to recover, for instance, the coyote feces, because they were finding finger bones in the coyote feces around the area. And they also, and this is a detail because it horrified me so deeply, I did also put it in Needless Street, which is they had to take all the birds' nests in the area in as well, because the birds had been making nests with human hair. And this is probably the depths of horror, really. This is where your nightmares and your dreams escape into the real world. Like the worst, most awful thing you can imagine has somehow happened. And I think that my kind of recoil from those facts does make its way into Needless Street, even though the plot and the events and in fact I think the way the book works is very different, and it's not about Ted Bundy in any way.
Right. Yeah. No. I was curious if the name was inspired by that, and
it definitely is part. Yeah. I think it. Yeah. It is. It's to do with that.
How's it feel to have Stephen King blurb your book?
I'm not going to swear, but imagine me doing a long string of.
Yeah, if you want.
I think I just shouted. for about an hour after it happened. So he took. I wake up in the night sometimes thinking about it, and I'm like, did that actually happen? Because it happened during the lockdown over here, and there was no kind of exterior confirmation, so there was a good chance I thought that maybe I just made it up, because we weren't seeing anyone or talking to anyone, and I just wondered if perhaps maybe it was not true, but it was, thankfully. Yeah, I couldn't. So he tweeted about it, and I've never met Stephen King. I don't know Stephen King. I don't even know. I almost don't want to, because I just feel I don't know what I'd say to Stephen King. Anyway, we got the tweet. You can see I'm already so excited. I got the tweet. I couldn't read it because I was so nervous. Is probably the mildest word to put on these feelings. So I handed it to my boyfriend. I was like, "Can you just read it for me?" and tell me if it's okay. Like a bit like opening your exam results, I was like, I can't. And he just looked at it. He was like, "Yep, think you're going to be happy with this? Yep." He's like the master of the understatement. But I grew up reading Stephen King. As we were talking up at the top of the show about this, his work and his imaginative universe was very much part of me personally, and very much how I formed me as a writer. So as I said, I still wake up in the night wondering if it actually happened. Which I think is probably the most rational kind of way to look at it.
I've said this before, and I'll say it forever. For me, Stephen King, I think you can't argue with this. He's the most successful author ever. And the only way you could say someone is more successful than him, I guess, would be like, say, Shakespeare due to longevity. But I think of all of us authors, King's going to be the one we talk about forever. Obviously, there could be more. But
I just think also what incredible grace and generosity to seek out, like, nobody, I mean, really, like, I'm so glad that Needle Street seems to be resonating with people and finding a readership. No one knew who I bloody was. Like, that's true. And, it's incredibly kind of moving in a way that someone who really could sit back and basically have hot and cold baths and running money for the rest of their lives doesn't do that, and seeks out authors and supports horror and supports writing and stories. And I'm immensely grateful on a personal level, but I think it's really worthy of note and impressive in its own right as well.
Yeah, you know what? I'll be very blunt. I wasn't aware of you until, I don't even know how I saw that, but I saw the blurb.
No one was.
I saw the blurb and I'm like, I trust King. And I think that's probably why he does it. He's done it his whole career. Dance Macabre, I didn't know who Jack Finney was. I know he did Vision of the Body Snatchers, but I didn't know who that author was until I read Dance Macabre. If you're in that position, you could definitely break or make an author, and I never see him do anything but positivity.
Yeah, I would never. That's right. I was going to say, like, all he does is lift up, isn't it? And it's so. Yeah, it must be so strange being him.
Yeah.
I often think about it probably far too often. Like, what must it be like? I mean, who does Stephen King send his books to for blurbs?
Himself. His son, Joe Hill. Hey, blurb my book. I'm your dad.
Joe Hill was one of the first people to read it, actually. And
really?
He was. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Joe Hill, because he read it and responded really, really early. And he responded so early that because he got really early arc, that we've got to put on the advanced reading copies his quote, which is kind of amazing, really. So even before it had gone out to other people, so Joe Hill kind of saved my bacon, really. And I don't know. Again, see, it sounds like I'm making it up, doesn't it? It sounds like I'm making it up. But I read your book.
It's, I don't tell people it's 5 out of 5, my opinion, for whatever it's worth. I don't say that unless I mean it. It's a good book. It's a really good story.
so much. It really burned inside me, that book. Like,
I could tell you put your heart in this.
Yeah, I really did. I was just, it was like an animal scratching to get out. I couldn't stop writing it. And like we were saying, it's not entirely a nice place to spend your time, but I just couldn't stop. I felt like and also writing it, I think, changed me as well in lots of ways. If you know the subject matter, and doing research for it really changed me. Like I by talking to people about their trauma and about some of the mental health effects that has, I kind of the way I see the world and my understanding of what's possible, and also of resilience, of human resilience, was really just expanded so hugely. I felt enlarged by the book just as much as I was writing it, really.
Yeah, I saw your what's it called? I was going to say bibliography. That's not correct. The list of resources that you use, and it's impressive. My wife's a social worker, and she and I talk. It's the one subject.
Yeah.
It's the one person in my life that I said, any story you tell me about this, I'm not going to ever write it. You can't. But the stuff she tells me about what she deals with, she's opened my world up to mental health, to people struggling, to, you know what, even prisoners or sex workers. I had not like a hateful outlook to either, but I had a ignorant viewpoint for both of them. And after we had long talks, and she told me about working with some, not inmates, but others, I was like, they're just people. And that's such a silly thing that I should have recognized in the beginning, but I didn't. And it's...
But that's so I find that so interesting, because that is exactly, those words are invented to dehumanize, aren't they? Like the words we use to talk about some of those people you just mentioned, that it's meant to make us, almost like we were talking about earlier, to like reduce them to the non-human, to an object.
Yeah, and it's this book, I can certainly see why. And once people read, whoever listens, once they read it, or if they have, I'm sure they can agree. I'm put that much time into this and that much heart. For me, I'm reading this and I'm like, well, what's next? And you got Sundial out, so
yes,
I don't know what else to say about Needless Street without spoiling it. So, if you're okay with it, can we jump to Sundial, because that cover alone? Oh my goodness. What's it about? What's the synopsis?
So Sundial is about a mother, Rob, who comes to understand that her child has behavioural problems, and in fact might be a danger to her younger sister Annie. And so she takes Rob and Callie go to the desert, back to Sundial. It's set in the Mojave Desert in Southern California. They go back to Sundial, and which is this almost like a sort of an abandoned kind of facility in the middle of nowhere with like fences and things like that. And Rob starts to tell Callie the story of their past, and she sort of comes to understand that their past and Callie's present have more to do with each other than she previously thought. Because and both of them come to fear that the other one wants to kill them. So it becomes almost like this very tight, very intense emotional standoff between the mother and the daughter. Wow. And Callie's 12, and so it's a very kind of, because I find the family relationships, they're so powerful. My family's lovely, I'd hasten to add. Like, my family's fantastic. But I think that's just another way of writing your deepest fears, isn't it? Because my fear is of that misalignment. Like, I'm so afraid of that going wrong, because it would just be the worst thing you could imagine. And I think the mother-daughter relationship's really powerful as well. And I think it's often quite sanitized. I think there's a lot of things in, that we feel about each other in that particular dynamic that are very, very strong and not very socially acceptable. But I don't think that lessens the power of the bond in their way. Do you know what I mean? I think it's just part of it. So I really enjoyed exploring that, and the sort of intertwining it with the Mojave Desert as well is amazing. Like there's no better set, because there are very few places on Earth that can kill you as easily as the Mojave. I mean, Australia definitely. Australia was probably puts up a good fight for second place, but like the heat, the cold, the animals, the exposure, there's everything. Just pick one, and it's also very gothic, the desert, I think, because it's as good as a set of high stone walls. You're as trapped as you would be inside a castle. Lastly, because I'm gripped by this, is I'm completely obsessed with the late 60s, early 70s CIA experiments, which have their most extreme form in the MK Ultra experiments. And I spent many hours combing through the declassified documents. I mean, it's like 3 words and then redacted.
Is that like the LSD period?
Yes, very much so. And the MK Ultra, yes, and the MK Ultra experiments were the human experiments. But there is this one which I knew I had to write about, where they created remote control dogs. So by planting electrodes in the dog's brain, they make they stimulate the pleasure impulse. So the dog learns to seek the pleasure impulse, and if it's in a certain place, it'll make them turn left. So they can make the dog run in a square or run in a circle, or basically operate them by remote control with a little handheld device.
The
trouble was, there's no practical application for it at all. Right. Like, it was just literally the definition of the Jurassic Park adage of, you were so busy thinking about whether you could, you didn't stop to think whether you should. So they just continued it. But I saw that and I was like, isn't that a horrible thing to do just to see if you can, Yeah. And that's where horror starts, isn't it?
Yeah, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Going back to something you were discussing earlier about how basically, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but basically how we write this horror. And this reminds me, we had Chuck Palahniuk on earlier this year, and he said something. Yeah. He said something about this that I always think about now, that we write these horrible events to kind of prep ourselves for if it happens.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's like a vaccination in a way.
Yeah, well said. For me, and especially since I became a dad, it's the death of a child, and it's brutal. And
wow, yeah.
I don't enjoy writing this shit. Sometimes, like, I don't publicly say this while I do it, but like, sometimes I've written the death of a kid, and it's not even graphic, but it just guts me, and I come close to bawling my eyes out. But it kind of, like, as a dad, it's just like I'm always kind of like looking out for him. I don't trust strangers because I watch too many documentaries on serial killers and stuff, and I let him do his thing. I try not to like hover over him, but it kind of at the end of the day feels like therapy. Is that kind of how you felt after finishing Needless Street or other stories?
I think what's magical about it is that something that starts inside you takes on a life of its own. And I think once that happens, it stops controlling you. So in that sense, yes, I think it is like therapy. I'm always wary of the therapy writing comparison, only because you see, when people do like word vomit, and it's a sort of, and the Me novel where it's it's all about the deep profound feelings of the writer.
Right.
But I do think it has. Maybe like therapy is a good comparison, but maybe it's more like an exorcism. Maybe there's a sort of element to it, but there's definitely, I do get that. When I finished, there's a sense of, well, first of all, abject exhaustion, but also of having taken something out and removed it. And I think that's probably exactly the feeling that you're talking about. It's a very powerful thing. It's a powerful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I'm really curious. You have, maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds like you have a British accent.
I do.
but
Well,
you're from you were born in America.
I was, and I actually spent more of my childhood in America than I did. I never lived in the UK until I went to university. But
I'm confused now.
I know. Think how I feel. So there are three things at work here. So first of all, we move so often that I never had time. And also in Madagascar, I was speaking French, so there's no accent there at all. And Kenya is mostly English people. Yemen is Arabic. Morocco again, it's in French, and so I had my parents' accent. When I was a teenager, I had a really obnoxious American accent. But then what probably dealt the death blow to it was going to acting school in New York, where you can either be cut glass RP or you can be standard American, but there's none of this kind of like mixture, which this sort of mongrel kind of mid-transatlantic thing that I had going on. And I think it just it kind of, I think the clarity and the crispness and all of that with that getting put in makes it sound even more English than it already does. But I wrote my first two books about the UK and about these wild places in Scotland and Dartmoor, and I sort of there's a huge part of me which misses like that part of my background and accessing that part. So when I started to write, so Sundial and Needless Street are both set in the US, it sort of opened up these quite passionate feelings in me and these memories. Like I started remembering things that I hadn't remembered about my childhood. And it was really, again, I guess it's the therapy thing raising its head again, isn't it? It felt like a sort of a coming home, from a writing point of view.
I'm just trying. I'm digesting everything you just said. Yeah.
So you talk a lot.
No, I love it. We like us to talk a lot, but the me and all my people, Brennan and our guest hosts, we like it when when I say we, that's who I'm referring to. We like our guests talking a lot because it means, what's that?
The royal we.
Yeah. It means that we talk less, but we do learn a lot, and I'm so curious. I guess as an overview of all those places where you lived, is what do you think you took away from each place? And I know that's a lot to tackle, but you have a lot of life experience, obviously, because those are. I don't know anyone that's lived in Yemen or Morocco.
No, you certainly couldn't. You'd certainly have a terrible time living in Yemen at the moment. I think, yeah. Well, so we lived there because my father is a water economist, and the reason you go to those places is to help design strategies so that people, and irrigation and desalination and all these things, so that people can have water.
Is that like an engineer?
No, it's more like making a plan for kind of the economic and the financial and the and the development plan. It's development.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's and when you see those places, one of the things that which are always all the ones I'm talking about anyway, very, very short of water, and in fact incredibly arid and dry and subject to drought and famine. Certainly one of the things that was drummed into me from a very young age is like, you're fucking lucky, you are a lucky little fucker, and that's, I think, a very appropriate thing to tell your child, if you know what I mean. I think particularly, but it was the evidence was very much in front of my eyes about that. I've never been in danger of dying of hunger, and I never will be, hopefully. But to live in places where people are daily at risk from that is very it forces you to recognise what a huge gap there is in the world between the haves and the have-nots. This is not a very fun answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Then I also, I suppose, also Madagascar in particular, which has some of the most amazing biodiversity on Earth, they estimate that they discover a new species in Madagascar every 3 minutes.
What?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah, even if it's just a new grasshopper, or a new louse. There is a new. Yes,
that
so,
blows my mind.
Well, it's incredible, and I've seen, we used to keep chameleons as pets. We used to keep little chameleons that we found in the garden as pets. So I've seen this beautiful, absolutely stunning kind of weird nature you couldn't imagine, really. You couldn't dream up. Like, if you wrote it, your editor would be like, it doesn't sound believable. Like, we went on a walk once in the rainforest, and there are these little ants who have like these pink and white oval shaped wings. They're beautiful. They look exactly like, those sugared almonds.
Yes.
Yes, they look like that. And so they're walking along a branch, they're pink and white, and someone said, oh, you can eat them if you like. I thought, what? Okay. So I ate a couple, and they were really fizzy. They were like sherbet, because I think it's because they're like ants, like they have formic acid in them. Anyway, what becomes obvious is that the difference between all of the amazing wildlife that I saw growing up is so much more in danger now than it was. The coral reefs that I swam in, 20 years ago, 30 years ago now it must be, are really decimated and in danger. So I think what I take away from it is how incredibly arduous lives can be for humans there, and how in danger the natural world is. All over the world. Again, sorry, it's not very cheerful, but that's what I think about most when I look back on it. I also think that because there was no one else, it gave me an incredibly close bond with my family, and that can be, I think, that of course I can explore it, and a gift which I can endlessly explore in my writing for years to come. But I think that those are the things that I think about when I look back on it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. That's a really great answer too, because you can probably spend a few lifetimes tackling all those issues and have plenty of room to write more books. It seems like you're the type of writer that, and this isn't a knock on others, but when you put a book out, it feels like there's, how do I word this? It's not just a horror book, for lack of a better word. There's a lot to it. There is. I'm struggling to come up with the proper way, because I don't want to sound like I'm insulting other horror writers or books, but
do it.
It's not just for fun. There's so much meaning, and the behind the scenes is you can learn a lot from it. And it's books that if your other books are like Needless Street, you can learn a lot, and it can change your outlook on life for the rest of your life. And I don't think every book does that, which every book shouldn't do that. Some are just for fun. Some are, they all have different meanings, but it feels like, at least with Needless Street, that's the kind of stuff you put out. That was my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in that adage about write as if you're dying.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because I just think it's such a privilege to be able to do this for a start. And I always think, just put everything you are and have and can and bear into it. And I have, I think we touched on this earlier, but I've got such a place in my heart for the function that horror performs. The cathartic and going down into the writer and the reader go down into the caves or down into the dark hand in hand, and walk through that dark together, and then come out, whatever the outcome is, come out the other side together.
Right.
You're making yourself, you should make yourself, I think, incredibly vulnerable as a writer, even if it's not horror. Now, I actually maintain that all good writing has horror in it, but that's a separate subject. But I think it's your job to show people, to kind of crack your chest open, I think. And that's how I see it. I know there are lots of fantastic books that make you laugh and make you nostalgic or make you love or whatever. But this is the one that I do, the one that makes you terrified.
That's awesome.
And you have to put everything you are into it, I think. No,
I agree with you, and the reader can absolutely can absolutely feel that. At least I did. I can't speak for everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. You know what? I'm jumping so far away from what we were just talking about, but it has something to do with Neela Street. I was really curious how the event with Gillian Flynn went.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
That's
So
so cool.
right. I've had a year.
You've had a hell of a year.
I've had a year. Yes. Oh my god. There's a really dangerous thing that happened during that event, which is that I started to feel like we were friends. I spoke to my agent the next day and I was like, I think we're friends now. And she was like, you just maybe just calm down a little. I'm like, no.
I'm like that with guests too. I gotta be honest. Like, I'm like, do we have a friendship? But I don't always voice it though, because they're like, oh, this guy, let's not go on his show again.
Yeah, I feel like I also feel like, you know, our levels of social interaction have been so distorted now.
Yeah.
If I speak to someone on a Zoom call now, then maybe we are friends. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know where the boundaries are anymore. But for Gillian Flynn, and I had to make this note for myself, call her Gillian, because for English people, that's counterintuitive. But Gillian Flynn, I was like, I've never been so nervous. And also, I think I had to record it because it was at, I think it was West Coast time. I had to record it at 2 a.m, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I'd stayed up mainlining coffee and I was like shaking by the time and she's just so funny, and I'd watched lots of stuff of hers beforehand, so I'd have something to, I mean, not that I didn't have things to talk to her about, but I thought, you know, just to see what her energy's like and see, you know, do a bit of research and do that wonderful thing, that sneaky kind of like smart ass thing where you quote someone back to themselves. And so I did all that and I was like, oh my God, she's really funny. Because she is really funny. She's so dry and so wise and so fantastic. And I have to admit, by the time we came on, I was kind of almost physically shaking.
I bet.
Yeah. And then we were in this sort of the green room, you know, the virtual green room beforehand, and she came on and I was like, fuck, here it is. And and she just, oh God, she said something so beautiful and about Needler Street. She was like, I just want to tell you, you know, I'll say this again in the panel, but I thought it was such a wonderful book, and I thought you've got a real art, you've got a real talent for telling the story, and I loved Olivia, and I was just, you can imagine me just getting more and more tense like this, and I just burst out. I was like, oh my God, Gillian, you're killing me here. And she said, okay, all right, well, I won't embarrass you. So she didn't say it again in the
oh
because I told, you know, I shot myself in the foot there, but I was so, I thought she was amazing, and I do think we're friends, actually.
You could be, you know, only you two.
No, I was very grateful to her. Again, another person who has no need to go on she doesn't need to do a panel with me, you know. She did that, I'm assuming, because she's supporting a book that she likes, and I found it again incredibly generous, and I'm really grateful. It was one of the best moments of. I've had a fantastic year.
Yeah. I was going to throw out there also, I saw that you have at least one very awesome billboard of Needle Street on, it looks like your London walking tour, which that's so, what's that? What's that like, just to see, oh, I wrote that.
It was amazing. It was amazing, but no one was allowed out.
Oh.
So I had to go and see them on my own or in groups of 2. Because you're not allowed to assemble. You weren't at that time anyway allowed to assemble in groups larger than 6. So, and no one was really on the street, but it was it was in, you know, fantastic places, lots of traffic and stuff. So I'm hoping, it was just the experience of seeing it was quite something, I have to say. I thought, again,
signed a billboard.
Yeah, I signed them all.
That's awesome.
Just to say I'd been there, you know. Oh, so basically tagged them.
You tagged them. You've been in magazines for this. I mean, I don't know if this is too forward, but is it a matter of you got the right agent, you got the right publisher? I mean, the story obviously deserves it.
Well, I had sorry, not terrible. I had a slow start, and I think perhaps the, um, the answer is I think I found my stride at the same time as finding a really two sets of amazing, completely brand new imprints. So Nightfire and Viper in the UK are both brand new. Viper started, I think, last year, and Nightfire are releasing their very first titles as an imprint this month. So,
Yep.
including Needless Street. So, I think it's a combination of maybe paying my dues a little bit in terms of I don't know that I would have been ready for this 5 years ago, honestly. I don't know that, like, I have to write my next book in 8 months, so that's tight. It's doable because I've got four books, including Sundial, under my belt now. But I don't know that if I'd been a debut, I would have been equipped to do that in that way. So there's a sort of serendipity to it, but I think most of the credit goes to Nightfire and my editors, Kelly and Miranda, simply because I Little Eve, which is my previous novel, my second novel, which won the Shirley Jackson, was
Which
amazing.
that's no small feat by any stretch.
It's incredible, but
Yeah.
it sold minus copies its first year. I basically went to book jail for a bit, and Kelly and Miranda both took a huge leap of faith and said, no, this is special. We can do something with this. The numbers did not support them. I'm being very open about this because I don't see why. I don't know. Writers are always weird about their sales figures. I mean, maybe if you'd asked me this time last year, I would have been weird too. But I'm fine now. So I think it is definitely having the right team behind you. But it's also, I would also say, I spent so long trying to write the platonic ideal of a Gothic novel, and these very historically accurate. With Raw Blood, for instance, my first one, I Googled almost every word in it to make sure that it wasn't anachronistic. So if someone in the 17th century would have used that word, I had to see that was the case. Otherwise, I wouldn't use it. And it's mind-numbing how much time it took. Yeah. So I think in a way, kind of them not, I thought Needless Street is my last shot, and I thought I'm just going to write, the book of my heart. I'm going to write the book, the weirdest and the mad anarchic idea that comes to me, and not worry about anything else, and not worry about what's been done before, and not worry about the market or a readership or anything like that. I think it's a sort of defiant novel in a way, and I think some of that shows through.
There's relationships in Needless Street that I didn't see coming, and one in particular at the end. Revelation. There's a big revelation at the end too, and I just thought it all tied together really nice. And I don't know if this ruins it. If it does, tell me to cut it. But a lot of it made me sad. But that's not to knock it, because it's a horror book. Okay, it's not gonna always have a happy ending.
Yeah, and I think one thing I wanted to do was, it is a horror book, but there are I think horror can rely on certain tropes or attitudes, particularly towards mental illness, that I really, really wanted to work against, as it were. I think this is a book that definitely it wears the clothes of one thing, and then in the third act throws off its cloak, which is the best way I can put it, I think. But I am using, and you quite rightly put your finger on it. Like I am using the equipment of horror to tell quite a different story, and that was important, I thought.
Yeah, I totally agree. And back to my wife, who I view as like she's my moral compass, smartest person I know, and it has to do with Needless Street, specifically with mental health. And she, from the early on in a relationship, going 9 years next year, and doesn't like how a lot of horror movies typically address mental health. And I never, you only know what you know, and unless someone points it out to go, aha, I never thought of it like that. I never thought of it like that until my wife pointed it out. And for me, that was a moment where I'm like, because you talk about it at the end, the acknowledgments where you talk to these certain people and they open your eyes. My wife's opened my eyes big time with that. And I'm like, I'm not saying it's an author's responsibility. I'm not putting any of that shit on any other writer. But for me, I put responsibility solely on myself. I'm not putting any. I hate when people do that. Like a writer's response, like that's a blanket statement. They're not helpful. But for me, I will try my best, especially mental health, to try to tackle it in a way that isn't offensive and cruel and unkind. No, that's not to say. I'm sorry to interrupt. That's not to say that they won't be the bad guy. That's certainly not true for real life. But to like at least anchor my approach in like this is what happens. But we're all people. All people are different. Some are good, some are bad. So I don't know. Sorry if I blathered on. It's like silly what I said.
It's not silly at all. It's not silly at all. I'm really resonating. I'm really like empathizing with what you're saying. I think that's right. And I think it also, we're talking about the most vulnerable people, really.
Yeah.
And statistically, I love a statistic. Statistically, much more likely to be victimized than be perpetrators. So I think that there's a disproportionate amount of horror that portrays mental illness as a sort of marker for villainy or for deranged behavior or for hurting people, whereas actually it's very much probably the other way around. We know that trauma begets trauma, and we know that sometimes abuse and trauma can cause someone to inflict that on someone in turn. But the fact is, there are loads of people who are traumatized and abused who don't. Lots, far more. And I felt really. I felt the people who spoke to me were incredibly generous with their experience and forthright about things which I simply cannot conceive of having experienced. So the idea of reducing that to a kind of cookie cutter stereotype or villainizing it would be abhorrent, really. Also, I asked a question at the end of one of the interviews I did, the big interview I did, which was, what would you like to see represented, like in the world about, your situation that you don't. And they said a couple of things, one of which I found really interesting, which is they said, well, it would be really nice if the story was about us instead of us turning up at the end as an axe-wielding maniac or something, in terms of talking about mental health. It'd be really nice if we could have a story about us. And I think we're getting better, but I think horror still perhaps lingers a little in the backwards there of relying on certain stereotypes. So that was important, really important. Yeah.
You nailed it. You absolutely, because when I'm thinking about this, and it's so. Me and Brendan were talking about this. He's like, "Good luck not stepping on spoilers with this one." I'm like, I think we're doing a good job, but I just feel so sad for Ted. I'll leave it at that. You did a great job with that. And one thing that I want to add to the mental health and the abuse of people in authoritative position is someone that I care deeply about, a friend of mine, that's like family now, went through some stuff after she had her 2 kids and went to a facility, and it's pretty bad. And she was treated horribly, and that makes me so incredibly. I'm battling between so incredibly enraged and so incredibly sad, because there's probably more instances of that than we know, and it's not like anything can happen. It's sad when authority abuses someone in the most vulnerable position, and that goes back to mental health. And And you're right. You someone like you, whether you want to whether you want to admit it at this point or not, you are setting the mold for the future for the next generation of writers. And
Oh my God.
you're a writer that has the validation from the biggest writers in the world. So whether you admit it, you can see that or not. Like, you're telling a writer like me that hasn't published a novel yet,
Mm-mm.
this is one way that you can approach mental health. And for me, I'm big on that. And I won't go into crazy detail, but like, I'm 32, almost 33. I'm just realizing now that my ADHD has been a huge hindrance for me,
Really?
and I'm
Yeah.
finally addressing it with a psychiatrist. I'm on medication. It's very helpful, but I didn't realize how much mental health dealt in my life, and it's crazy because I got family members that are in facilities. I don't know what the proper term is, but it's been in my life and my family forever, and
Oh,
that so I'm right there with you. I'm right there
yeah.
with you with this, and I'm really happy with what you've done. If that means anything.
It means a lot. Thank you for saying that's. I'm having a moment. Thank you.
Oh, you're getting me all choked up. Stop the cat.
Oh, well.
It means it's. Whew, I'm
Yeah.
getting teary eyed now because it means a lot to me.
Thank you. Well, it means a lot to me too. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think we could certainly do what I hope you write that. I hope you finish your novel. And I hope you write that. I hope you write, those stories, because I think we need more things that tell stories of those sorts of mental health struggles, and and break out of that old kind of sort of like straight like I always think of it as like a Victorian straitjacket,
Yeah.
kind of a Victorian straitjacket of representation.
Or like the Elephant Man, where it's not. I don't think it's mental health. It's just a physical.
Yeah, but it's just so kind of fetishized, and it's very. I think it's very difficult. I think it's very difficult to talk about people as human beings, because that forces us to look at them as human beings, and sometimes we don't want to do that because it's easier to not. And I say we, in the global sense,
Yeah, and this just popped in my head. You were talking about how you're like, I think is it Gillian or Jillian?
Gillian.
Oh man, I messed up.
No. Don't worry, you can cut it.
No, I'm not gonna cut it. I'm not gonna cut
but
that. That's
but
fine.
I had it in my head the whole time, thinking I have to, because as I said, over here it's always Gillian. So I was like,
Okay.
remember, it's Gillian.
So, okay, Gillian Flynn, how you're like, I think we're friends now. Like, like I said, I felt that way with Yes before. And sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. But their
Yeah.
social media has done something where it's like you can say whatever you want at any second, and there's no filter. There's no, for a lot of us, it's like you see something and you're like, there's no time where, when we were growing up, I don't think we're very far in age, is you can't, we got the internet later on in life, but
Yeah.
it's still like, even before then, you can't just text someone and say what's immediately on your mind. You got no time to digest that, and there's a lot of ugliness online, and I've learned to just stop replying to it.
There, there really is, and there's so much. Like, I think that I think we're the lucky ones. So having had, but I think we're the last people who remember what it's like.
We are the last generation. We really
Yeah,
are.
yeah. And there's a really direct result of that, I think. Louis C.K., who I love as a comedian,
Mm-hmm.
obviously some problematic things around him,
Sure.
but I remember him saying, like, if a kid throws a stone in a playground, they see the stone hit the other kid, and they can see the other kid cry, and they understand the consequences of their actions because they can see directly what's happened when they threw the stone.
Right.
They feel how they've made the other child suffer. And But unfortunately, with the internet, you don't see that. It's a consequence-free environment where you can say whatever you like, as hurtful as it may be, and you will never see the other child cry. And I thought that was really, really a sort of clear way of putting it, in that you can. It's this sort of like shouty vacuum where everybody's just screaming all the time, and just, it's easy. It's much easier to say things which you would never say to someone's face or to a living being. Forget, and again, that dehumanization. It just becomes a sort of words on a screen. You forget that there's another person at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go into detail, but I've had people say some crazy shit about me, and I vent to my close friends. I'm like, you ask anyone that knows me in person, they would laugh at that. They'd be like, that's not him. but there's no, I bring it up because there's really, with a lot of cases, no nuance. And it's just like, life ain't black and white. This isn't this isn't The Giver.
It's really weird that we've been given the biggest discussion forum ever created by people in the world, and all we can do is revert to black and white. Like, it's really, talk about, like, paradox, but
that's a good point. And I've said similar stuff. Like, we have the greatest technology and the greatest tool to learn and grow as a human society, but humans are humans. We're dumb. We just fight with each other about stupid stuff.
Yeah, really dumb. And actually, I've got a lot of time for dumb. I've got a lot of time for funny. I've got a lot of time for just like looking at stupid stuff on the internet. But I mean, it was designed to like help people communicate and share ideas, and maybe like with back in the day with the uprisings in Egypt and so on, to help people who live in totalitarian regimes communicate better. Like, it was, and for photos of cats. This is a legitimate use of it, I maintain, but it definitely wasn't. It wasn't intended for us to end up in endless arguments about, whatever kind of stupid thing people are onto today. But this is where we are, apparently.
I really don't know if it's a good idea that we further explore other planets.
Well, there's that theory, and I can't remember the name of it now, which is absolutely maddening. But there's that theory that the reason we've never been able to contact alien life is because at a certain point, each society hits peak stupidity and destroys itself. So just on the cusp of being able to do, and like the travel, the light speed travel, we all just implode, and we're getting there, I feel.
That sounds pretty accurate. I would love to know something about where do you hope to be down the line? Like, I don't know if you currently are. I'm just going to assume, correct me if I'm wrong, please. Are you a full-time writer at the moment?
I am, luckily, yes. I'm very lucky to have made that transition. Yeah.
That's congrats. That's my dream too.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Where do you hope to be? What would be like a comfortable place for you as far as like output of books? Is one enough for you each year? Every other 2 books a year, or one every other year?
Well, my plan is to do 1 a year for the next 3 years at least.
Okay.
Because I've got the stories, and or at least I've got the need. And also I'm so lucky to have been given this opportunity. And the best thing for me to do is do what I couldn't have done, as I was saying, as a debut author. Is to really work hard and follow through on it. So I think I'm going to do a book a year for as long as I can. It's quite tiring, but then sure. Life is tiring.
Yeah.
We've got the film thing with Needless Street in process with Andy Serkis's Imaginarium, which is great, and I'd really like to. If I don't know if I can do it as the thing, but let's see. I'd really like to try doing scripted writing as well. But I mean, the real answer to your question is, I'm so happy. If I'm just here in 5 years, I'd be absolutely made up and delighted. You know, I've been this. I've been really lucky, and I'm in a really good place.
I'd love to be in your position one day. It seems like it's pretty awesome.
It's really awesome, and what the nice thing is that I went straight from book jail to here, like, so it can happen, like, and I think the thing is just to try and be ready for it, you know.
And book jail, is that just because we kind of brushed on it? Is that just where your sales aren't super great and your publisher just doesn't want to put faith?
Yes, it's where your sales are terrible. No one will offer you. We had a really hard time selling Media Street.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And you know, credit where credit's due. Both my publishers came in before Stephen King tweeted about it.
Nice.
So, you know, they were just very brave and bold. They took the leap, you know. Whereas, I mean, we used to have this thing. My agent called, I called Rejection Mondays. My agent would send me all the rejections that we got in the previous week, and this went on for a good 4 or 5. I can't have done it. It must have been 3 months or so.
Oh,
but
man.
It was really interesting because I always think. Because also I did a creative writing course, so I come from a master's in creative writing. So I come from like a culture where you listen to criticism, and I thought, oh, okay, I will read all these rejections to see if there's a common thread. Because if 4 people out of 5 don't get it, it's probably not working.
Right.
So I read all these rejections, like, you know, relievingly and relaxingly or not, every single one of them was different. Every single person had a different problem with this book.
Okay.
A lot of them, actually, the only common problem that people said was they were a bit hesitant about the cat. And I was like, well, that's non-negotiable. The cat is... the cat
What are you supposed to change about Olivia?
Well, people suggested that she should be a person instead, like a person living with her. I know, I agree. I know, exactly.
They don't get it, man.
Yeah, shut up. You don't know. So and also this also came after a big changeover. Like I left my agent, and you know, so it was a brand new agent who had to go to bat for me in quite difficult circumstances, and she just became this champion with a sword, like kind of fighting for this impossible book about a talking cat from someone who'd sold minus copies with their last book. Like, it was really like, it wasn't a given that this was going to find an audience. And that's what makes me triply, quadruply grateful that it's found an audience, you know.
You know what? Going back to if this happened to you as a debut author, I mean, I don't want to say you would have acted this way, but maybe it's better that you went through the downfall first because you can appreciate the upside more.
Oh, I mean, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I said earlier, and I think I stand by it. I'm not sure I would have been ready anyway to have this. I'm not sure I would have been ready to be able to produce books at the rate that I now want to produce them. But also to know what it feels like to be kind of not doing very well makes this, again, kind of unbelievable. I mean, really, like the first like month after my American book deal and B, Stephen King's tweet, well, as I said, just wall to wall swearing. I just swore all month. I was just sitting there going,
It's funny when you swear because you do it so infrequently.
I must be like keeping a tighter control of myself than usual.
That's hilarious. This is so random, but I meant to say earlier when we were talking, and I feel like I'm gonna mess up her name, Gillian Flynn. When you were talking about Shaken, so I had one moment like that with a guest, and that was one of my favorite authors ever, Peter Straub. When he came on last month, all I did was tweet and ask him, and he was so kind to say yes. So and I've gotten shit from my peers for that's how my approach is, but I don't give a shit if someone sees me get ignored. I don't care who it is. I tweeted George R. R. Martin. I'll expect him to reply. If he does, awesome. If he doesn't, I expected that. But the whole day before, because this was on a Friday evening, so I'd work from 7 to 3, and then I got home and we recorded at 4.
Mm-hmm.
The whole work day, I was jittery. My boss asked if I was okay. I'm like, I'm talking to someone that I'm like, dude, he's so highly praised by me for a reason, and I'm like, I don't know how to react, and I still can't believe I talked to him. And we email sometimes. I get it. I totally get it.
I loved Black House. Did you read Black House?
That's the thing. I haven't read that one yet. I can't believe I haven't, but I'm a late bloomer with reading.
It's really spectacular. I just loved it. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, I'm probably gonna get shit for saying that, but I'm not gonna say I read a book that I haven't yet. There's so many good books.
No, why should you? No, awesome. Lucky you, because now you get to read it.
Yeah, I fell in love with Coco. That's like my book that I had a debut that I already wrote, and I was gonna plan on trying to push that, but then I read Coco, and I'm like, okay, this is inspiring new stuff. But my other thing that I wanted to bring up, which was I totally get how if you were a debut author, you don't think you'd be ready for this output. I've been writing with the mindset of being a novelist since 2013. I've written over 10 novels and about 1 million words worth of stories, but I went in with the mindset of I got to get all this stuff out before I'm happy, and I'm glad I waited. I'm glad that I didn't self-publish, not knocking self-publishing, but for me, I wasn't ready until 8 years after, and I'm still not completely ready.
It took me 7 years to finish my first novel, and that's not because I was doing it right. It's because I wrote at least 10 other crappy versions of that novel, and just kept going, because you're teaching yourself to write as you write, and it's,
it's an art form.
It's your 10,000 hours, isn't it? Well, more in my case, but
yeah. Well, I just thought, like, with my debut novel, you only get one, and I want to never look back. Like, when I'm an old man, I want to be like, yeah, I'm proud of that. And
you may not be. I don't know. I look back on mine and I'm like, they feel like old boyfriends. I'm like, I can't believe
I hate my old boyfriends.
Yeah, they do. They feel like old boyfriends. I'm like, I can't believe I was into you. But no, it's
hilarious.
But it's also very fond, because you're seeing almost like a snapshot of your past self,
Yeah, that's true. Which is kind of weird how authors rewrite some of their older books. Like with King, he wrote The Stand, and there was this author that pointed this out to us that I never thought of. I've only read the his 1990 something version,
right?
And this one author named Daniel Barnett talked about how he read both and he loves them, but he likes the one from the I think it's 70s. Because it had a different tone, and the way he described them, like, now I want to read that version. It sounds more raw and more like it has more meaning. And I don't mean to take away what King meant. I'm not inside. I don't know what he meant, but it sounds like a version I'd love.
I love one of my favorite things about is how rude Stephen King is about the first installment of The Dark Tower. He's like, it's really bad.
Yeah.
I don't think it's bad at all, but like I really respect his his really adamant stance that it's a terrible book.
Yeah, you got to be your worst critic, I guess. You know what? We're hitting about the hour and a half mark, so we can. We still have questions, but if it's all right with you, are you okay with wrapping down?
Fine, thank you so much. I've had such a lovely talk.
Oh, absolutely. Same here. But we still got a few more questions. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
I'll be quick. I won't do my.
No. I'm not asking you to rush. I'm in no rush today. What are you currently reading?
Am I currently reading? It's a really good question. Oh. because the thing is, I don't read while I'm writing, and I'm writing.
Oh, okay.
But the last thing I read that was absolutely fantastic, two things, was Mrs. March by Virginia Feito. I think it's Feito or Feito, Feito. It's about a New York socialite who goes slowly mad. Or does she? Is she going mad, or is her husband a maniac? We don't know. It's really, really good. And it starts in a bakery, which is just my idea of hell. So, and Mrs. March by Virginia Feito. And then the other last thing that I read that was absolutely fantastic, which I don't know if it's coming out in the States, when it's coming out in the States, is A Narrow Door by Joanne Harris. Joanne Harris, obviously very of Chocolat fame, is an incredible thriller writer, and she wrote this sort of really eerie, horrible book about a boys' school, which gets its first female kind of principal.
Oh God.
And they discover a body on the grounds on her first day. So it's got so many layers and textures. It's really good. Those two things were the last two things I read. I'm not reading now because I'm working on book 5, and I don't want to make too much noise in my head, you know.
Oh, hey, your process is your own. So for me, I'm almost done with another Stephen King blurb. Richard Chismar's
I read that.
Reading.
I think I should be on there somewhere. No, fuck it. Probably got more important people.
No. Reading this at the same time as reading your book, they're both dealing with serial killers, but in completely different ways. It's just so cool seeing two different, the same subject matter kind of attacked by two different ways, and I love it. I love it so much.
It fulfilled so many needs in me, like my true crime need coupled with my need for like horror. It was incredible. Like I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the detail, and it's such attention to care, and the whole thing just gave off this incredibly uncomfortable, awful atmosphere. I just thought it was great.
And the fact that he's in it, like, talk about metafiction.
I still maintain that Richard Chismar did it.
I love Rich. He's, talk about like being like, oh, well, taking a step back. How is this happening? I'm looking at my guest list, and I mean, when you follow me back on Twitter alone, I was like beside myself. I still don't get why people follow me. And I talk to Rich, I talk to him sometimes, and other authors, and I love your guys' stories so much. And then when you're a nice person, I'm just like, why are they talking to me? No. I still get imposter syndrome.
That is that's incredibly sweet, but yes, it is imposter syndrome.
Yeah. The other book I'm about to start is by Eric LaRocca. He came out with a book this year, a novella called Things Have Gone Worse Since We Last Spoke. And
I've heard of that. How is it?
For me, I think that it's one of the best contemporary horror books I've ever read. And it's short. It's like 109 pages.
Okay. Yeah, I'm writing it down. Hold on. Yeah. Okay.
It's sold over 20,000 copies. It's just like, he wrote, and this doesn't spoil it. It's about two women, and they're talking over the early aughts, early chats for LGBTQ folks, and it's so weird. Like, talk about people online being presumptuous and rude. Some people have called him out and said, how dare a straight white cis guy write about this? He's gay. He's very open about him being gay. And it's like, don't assume that shit. I know people with Stephen Graham Jones have assumed him being a white guy writing about natives, and it's just it's baffling and it makes me wonder, as a straight white dude, I'm like, I can't reply to any of that because they're gonna think I'm a piece of shit if I write about any of this. But my whole point is it's so
never get into an argument on the internet.
Nope.
Just don't.
I stopped.
Don't do it.
I used to.
Yeah. Nobody wins. Least of all.
And you don't really learn from each other. This is why I love the show. We're talking, even if we had different views on insert anything. Like, we're talking respectfully and we're learning from each other. That's why I love talking to people. But Eric's got a collection. It just came out, and I love his titles. It's called The Strange Things We Become in Other Dark Tales. I haven't read it yet. I'm going to get to that in about a day. And he's such a sweet guy. So, and he's very, as you are too, it's very apparent. A lot of people that a lot of writers I love, they take their work seriously, but they don't for themselves. And that's kind of I think that's a nice way to walk your life.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Oh, well, I've enjoyed this so much. What an unexpectedly moving conversation to have on a Saturday night.
Me too. I'm not gonna lie. I came very close to almost crying when we were talking about that mental health, because it actually I don't talk about publicly because
it's difficult.
I don't want to talk about my aunts and stuff because like they're just in a place that I still don't understand, and makes me really sad. But I'm glad we talked about it.
Me too. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for telling me. I don't know if you will include it in the show. You certainly no need to. Yeah. Okay.
I know I don't need to, but I think it adds, and the reason why I don't cut most stuff I say, I don't know who's going to listen to this, and not even this year. I don't know who's going to listen to this years from now, and they could relate and it could help them. So that's why I don't cut stuff. Most stuff.
I think that's a really good point, and particularly men talking about mental health is very important.
That's another thing that I've grown to not like the term toxic masculinity, only because of someone that said it in a better way, where it just evokes like this bro attitude. I don't like that attitude, but it kind of fights one bad thing with another. More so, I like to view it as just like sad, where guys have this need to not show their feelings. So I like to kind of battle that with saying, this is how I feel, and I know you can relate to it. But just a few more things, if that's okay, Kat.
For sure, yeah.
Listeners, if you have any interest in checking out our store or checking out articles from some of our lovely guests, including Eric LaRocca, wrote a great piece in Pride Month along with Bree Morgan, go to deadheadspace.com. If you want to go to the shop, there's a shop tab there. And where can people follow you, Kat?
At Catriona Ward on Twitter. And that's kind of it. I don't know why I don't have a website. I'm an idiot.
No way. You know what? Get someone. You're probably at the position where you can get someone to do that for you. Do you have any final thoughts? Any weird noises you want to make?
I think I've made probably my weirdest noises already, like many, many times. I mean, I've also done some swears, but I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and thank you for a wonderful, wonderful discussion, which has really made my day.
Oh man. Oof. I don't know how to reply to that. I can't believe it made your day. You made my, like, I took my time with your book. I finished it. I got no problem saying this. I finished it last night at 1:30 in the morning because it's not a
terrible time to finish my books.
Oh yeah, it was, but it was so wonderful because I'm at my most vulnerable, surrounded by even my wife's sleeping right next to me, but it's dark, and I took my time with it for a reason. I wanted to digest it, and there was a lot to digest. But my final thoughts are: thank you for talking to me, and we would really love it if you come back next year for season 3, which starts mid-January. So you, me, Brennan, and maybe another guest host can talk with you.
That'd be great. I'd love that, please.
I was gonna say guest. Listeners, next episode 115, is with Heather Levy. Her debut novel, Walking Through Needles, is out. It's been out for a little while. That airs this Thursday. And actually, Kat, your book is out in the UK. I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but it's not out yet in the US. So when this airs, September 20th, when does your book come out?
September 28th.
So you got 8 days to pre-order this book. Don't take my word for it. Stephen King and Joe Hill and so many others, Christopher Golden, have praised this book. Kat, it's been an honor talking to you, and thank you for almost making me cry. I need those.
Come on someone's podcast and make them cry. Okay, I would. All right. My boyfriend is going to take me out for dinner now, so we're going to go. Amazing. And going to go and celebrate. And thank you so much for everything. And speak soon.
Yes, you know what? We'll talk eventually. Listeners, thank you. You have many podcasts to choose from. We appreciate you picking us. Have a great day, Kat.
You too.